"Shut up!" my son screamed, and his hand cracked across my face. My name is Walter Thompson, and I'm 79 years old. All I had done was politely ask my daughter-in-law not to smoke in my living room, a simple request about my health in my own home. But 20 minutes after that slap echoed through my house, everything changed forever. For 30 years, I was a city health inspector. I'd shut down restaurants, bars, and businesses for far less than what was happening under my own roof. But my family saw me differently now. A frail old man they could push around, dismiss, and even hit when I asked for basic respect. They had no idea who they were living with, no idea about the professional network I'd built over 3 decades, no idea about the legal authority I still carried, no idea that my badge might have been retired, but my expertise and connections were very much alive. In those crucial 20 minutes after the slap, I made phone calls that would destroy their lives. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Here's what happened when they discovered who they'd actually hit. Let me back up 6 months. That's when my son Brandon and his wife Melissa moved into my house after Brandon lost his job at Davidson Automotive Parts. I was lonely after losing my wife, Margaret, 2 years earlier, so having family around seemed like a blessing. I was wrong about everything. From day one, they treated my 4-bedroom colonial home like their personal resort. Brandon, 42 years old, with a degree he'd never really used, spent his days playing video games in my finished basement, while Melissa chain-smoked on my furniture. They contributed $0 to groceries, utilities, or household expenses. When I gently suggested they help with the $340 monthly electric bill or the $280 weekly grocery costs, Brandon said I should be grateful for their company. "Dad, you're lucky we're here. Most kids our age wouldn't move in with their elderly parents." Elderly parents. That stung more than the financial freeloading. The smoking was immediate, constant, and everywhere. Melissa went through 2 packs of Marlboro Lights daily, lighting up wherever she pleased in my 2,400 square foot home. My leather armchair, the one Margaret and I bought for our 25th anniversary at a cost of $1,800, now reeked of tobacco. Burn marks appeared on my solid oak coffee table that I'd built myself in 1987. Yellow nicotine stains crept up my white walls like disease. "Melissa, could you smoke outside?" I'd ask politely. "The smell bothers me." "It's November, Walter. I'm not freezing for your comfort. Besides, this is a big house. Open a window if it bothers you." Brandon always backed her up with that entitled tone I remembered from his teenage years. "Dad, you're being dramatic. A little smoke never killed anyone. You smoked in the Navy, didn't you?" "That was 50 years ago, Brandon, and I quit when the health evidence became clear." "Well, Melissa's not quitting. She's stressed about being pregnant and unemployed." But it was killing me, literally, measurably, documentably. Within 3 months of their arrival, I developed a persistent cough that kept me awake nights. Dr. Michael Patterson ran comprehensive tests and found my lung function declining at an alarming rate. "Secondhand smoke exposure," he confirmed. "At my age, it was genuinely dangerous." "Walter, your respiratory system shows inflammation consistent with daily smoke exposure. You need to eliminate the source immediately or risk permanent damage." I showed Brandon the medical report with its stark black and white data. FEV1 declining, oxygen saturation dropping, bronchial inflammation increasing. He glanced at the $240 test results and shrugged. "You're fine, Dad. Stop being a hypochondriac. These doctors just want to scare old people into more appointments." The disrespect extended far beyond smoking. They rearranged my furniture without asking, moving pieces Margaret and I had carefully arranged over 43 years of marriage. Melissa used my credit card for grocery shopping, buying expensive organic items and premium brands I never requested. My weekly grocery bill jumped from $85 to $280. Brandon borrowed my 2018 Honda Accord and returned it with an empty tank and fast food trash scattered inside. When I objected to anything, the response was always the same dismissive phrase: "We're family. Family doesn't keep score." But I was keeping score. As a health inspector, documentation was second nature. I photographed every burn mark with my iPhone, noting dates and times. I saved every receipt showing their excessive spending. I recorded conversations where I asked them to respect my property and health. 30 years of investigative habits don't disappear with retirement. The worst part was watching my social life disappear. My neighbor Janet Miller stopped visiting because the smoke triggered her allergies. My weekly poker group relocated to someone else's house. My brother Paul made excuses to avoid holiday dinners. My own home became a place where old friends wouldn't visit, and I couldn't breathe freely. I felt trapped, in a situation that grew worse daily. Brandon was my only child, and Melissa was carrying what might be my only grandchild. If I pushed too hard, would I lose them forever? Would I never meet my grandchild? The fear of complete isolation kept me quiet, kept me accepting behavior I would have cited and fined as a professional. They sensed my hesitation and exploited it relentlessly. "Where else are you going to go, Dad?" Melissa said during one argument about smoking expenses. "You need us more than we need you. At your age, living alone is dangerous." Brandon nodded with cruel agreement. "Besides, this house will be ours eventually anyway. We're just getting comfortable early." That comment hit like a physical blow. They weren't guests in my home. They weren't family members down on their luck. They were squatters planning a hostile takeover of my life. But I stayed quiet. I was 79, alone, and terrified of losing my family. So I tolerated the smoke, the disrespect, and the gradual destruction of my home and health. Until that Tuesday evening when tolerance became impossible. By Thanksgiving week, my health situation had become critical and expensive. The persistent cough developed into chronic bronchitis, requiring daily medication. Dr. Patterson prescribed 3 different inhalers and warned me about continued smoke exposure with medical precision that chilled me. "Walter, at your age, respiratory damage can be irreversible. Your current lung function tests show a 30% decline from your baseline 6 months ago. You need to eliminate the source immediately." I had the medical documentation mounting like evidence in a criminal case. Lung function tests showing dramatic decline, from 85% capacity to 59% capacity in 6 months. X-rays revealing inflammation throughout my respiratory system. Blood oxygen levels dropping from 98% to 92%. Prescription costs mounting. $347 monthly for medications I never needed before they moved in. The financial bleeding extended beyond medical costs. Professional cleaning estimates to remove smoke damage. $2,800 for carpet deep cleaning and odor elimination. Carpet replacement throughout the main floor. $400 through $200 for materials and installation. Paint and wallpaper restoration in the living room and dining room. $1,950. Window treatment replacement. $890. Insurance wouldn't cover any of it because the damage was intentional and ongoing. "Smoking damage from residents isn't covered under your homeowner's policy," my agent explained. "That's considered preventable damage, but the financial cost was nothing compared to the social isolation that deepened weekly." Janet Miller, my neighbor of 15 years, stopped our Tuesday coffee visits that had sustained me through Margaret's illness and death. "Walter, I can't breathe in there. The smoke triggers my allergies and gives me headaches for hours afterward." My brother Paul canceled Thanksgiving dinner at my house for the first time since Margaret died. "Walter, I respect what you're dealing with, but I won't bring Linda into that environment. She's got asthma, and frankly, Dad would be rolling in his grave if he saw what you're allowing in his house." Even my medical appointments became sources of shame and frustration. Dr. Patterson asked repeatedly about my living situation with growing concern. "Walter, you understand that you're voluntarily exposing yourself to a known carcinogen daily? This is like choosing to work in an asbestos factory." "They're family, doctor. It's complicated." "Health isn't complicated. Either you're breathing clean air or you're not." The breaking point should have been the November 15th incident that I recorded in my daily health journal. I was watching the evening news when Melissa lit up directly next to my armchair. The smoke was so thick and immediate that I started coughing uncontrollably, gasping for air like I was drowning in my own living room. "Could you please move to the kitchen?" I wheezed between coughs, pointing to my inhaler on the side table. "No, Walter, I like this spot. Besides, the kitchen smells like last night's fish dinner." Brandon looked up from his phone with irritation. Dad, you're being ridiculous. It's just a little smoke. You survived the 70s when everyone smoked everywhere. And I had to use my emergency inhaler twice that evening, the red one reserved for severe attacks. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every breath felt labored and painful. I sat in my bedroom with the door closed and a towel stuffed under the gap, wondering if this was how I would spend my remaining years, trapped in my own home, slowly suffocating. The next morning, while searching for tax documents, I found my solution in the most unexpected place: my old filing cabinet. Buried beneath decades of paperwork were my complete career records: 3 decades of health inspections, violation citations, court testimony transcripts, contact information for every health official I'd trained, worked alongside, or collaborated with on major cases. Robert Martinez caught my eye first. I'd hired him straight from college in 2003, trained him personally on proper documentation and enforcement procedures. Now he was senior health inspector for County Region 7, overseeing the exact area where my house was located. Officer Patricia Williams, who specialized in elder abuse cases. We'd collaborated on dozens of violations where family members endangered elderly relatives. She'd always said that elder abuse thrived in silence and isolation. Dr. James Mitchell, the pulmonologist who served as expert witness in my landmark 1998 case against the downtown bowling alley. Their smoking section was contaminating the main area where senior leagues played 3 nights weekly. We'd won that case with overwhelming medical evidence. Suddenly, my situation looked different through professional eyes. I wasn't a helpless old man being abused by ungrateful family. I was a victim of documented health code violations with 30 years of professional connections and expertise. The irony was perfect and professionally satisfying. Melissa was committing smoking violations in a health inspector's house. Brandon was enabling elder abuse under the nose of someone who'd prosecuted hundreds of similar cases. They were violating regulations I'd helped write, in front of someone who knew exactly how to document and prosecute their crimes. But I needed documentation, real evidence, professional-grade proof that would hold up under legal scrutiny. That evening, I activated the security system I'd installed after Margaret died. 2 cameras, front door and living room, audio recording capability with timestamps, everything automatically saved to cloud storage with backup systems. I also started a comprehensive daily health journal, documenting every smoking incident, every respiratory episode, every piece of property damage, professional documentation with the same attention to detail I'd used in thousands of violation cases. November 20th, Melissa smoked 6 cigarettes in living room between 2:00 and 4:30 p.m. Coughing fit lasted 12 minutes, starting at 3:45 p.m. Used emergency inhaler twice. New burn mark discovered on coffee table. November 21st. Brandon told me to deal with it when I asked about outdoor smoking. Melissa smoked during my breathing treatment session. Both laughed about my dramatic response to smoke exposure. November 22nd. Melissa smoked 8 cigarettes throughout house. Called me ridiculous for opening windows. Brandon supported her behavior, said I was lucky they put up with my complaints. 5 days of documentation, clear pattern of intentional health endangerment. But I still hesitated to act. They were family, and despite everything, I hoped we could resolve this reasonably. That Tuesday evening, November 23rd, I decided to try diplomacy one final time. Tuesday evening, November 23rd, 6:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because the security camera captured everything with digital precision. I was sitting in my brown leather armchair trying to watch the local news about holiday traffic safety when Melissa walked into the living room with a fresh Marlboro light. She deliberately chose the spot directly across from me on the matching couch and lit up without any acknowledgement of my presence. The smoke hit me immediately like a physical assault. My chest tightened with that familiar sensation I'd grown to dread. The burning started in my throat and worked its way into my lungs. I waited 2 full minutes, timing it on the wall clock, hoping she might move to another room on her own. She didn't. She settled deeper into my couch cushions, scrolling through her phone, blowing smoke toward the ceiling fan that hadn't worked properly since they'd moved in. Melissa, I said quietly, using my most professional tone, could you please take that outside? My breathing's been really difficult today, and Dr. Patterson said any smoke exposure could cause permanent damage. She didn't even look up from her phone screen. It's 32 degrees out there, Walter. I'm not freezing for your paranoia. Paranoia. She called medically documented respiratory damage paranoia. I understand that it's cold, but Dr. Patterson said the smoke is seriously affecting my lungs. I have the test results if you'd like to see them. I'm asking nicely for basic consideration. Now she looked at me with that expression I'd seen thousands of times in my career. The look of someone who believes rules and courtesy don't apply to them. The look of someone who's never faced real consequences. Walter, this is my home too. I have a right to be comfortable here. I'm pregnant, I'm stressed, and I need to smoke to stay calm. Actually, Melissa, this is my home. Your guest's here. I own the mortgage, pay the utilities, and buy the groceries. I'm asking politely for basic respect for my health and property. Her voice got sharper, more aggressive. Guests? We're family, Walter. We're not going anywhere. This is our home now, and I'll smoke wherever I want. Brandon walked in from the kitchen, immediately sensing the familiar tension. His face already showed irritation before he understood the situation. What's the problem here? He demanded. Your father is trying to control where I can smoke in our house, Melissa said, playing victim with practiced skill. Our house? I stood up slowly, feeling my 79-year-old joints protest. Brandon, this is my house. I pay the $1,040 monthly mortgage, the $340 electric bill, the $280 weekly groceries, and the $180 monthly property insurance. I'm asking your wife to smoke outside so I can breathe in my own living room. Brandon's face flushed red with that familiar, angry expression I'd seen since he was a teenager when anyone challenged his sense of entitlement. Dad, you need to back off right now. Melissa's pregnant and stressed. She doesn't need you harassing her over nothing. Nothing? Brandon, I've developed chronic bronchitis since you moved in. My doctor says continued smoke exposure could cause permanent lung damage. I have medical documentation showing 30% lung function decline. Your doctor's an alarmist trying to scare you into more expensive appointments. You survived 79 years without being such a drama queen. Drama queen? My own son, calling me a drama queen for asking not to be poisoned in my own home. Brandon, I spent 30 years as a health inspector. I know exactly what secondhand smoke does to respiratory systems, especially in elderly people. I'm not asking for much, just basic consideration for my health. You're not a health inspector anymore, Dad. You're retired. Your opinion doesn't matter anymore. The world moved on without your outdated regulations. The words hit like physical blows. Your opinion doesn't matter. The world moved on. Outdated regulations. Melissa smiled, sensing victory in Brandon's support. She took a long, deliberate drag and blew the smoke directly toward me. Brandon's right, Walter. You're not in charge anymore. Time's changed. People don't panic over a little cigarette smoke like they used to. Something inside me hardened with professional resolve. 30 years of expertise dismissed as irrelevant opinion. Health codes violated in my own home by people who thought age eliminated authority. Actually, Brandon, health codes don't expire when you retire. Secondhand smoke regulations are stronger now than when I was enforcing them. And this is still my house with my rules. Shut up! Brandon exploded with sudden violence. Just shut up with your rules and codes and health inspector bullshit. You're embarrassing yourself. I stayed calm, which seemed to infuriate him more. I'm asking politely for basic respect in my home for my health. It's not just your home anymore, Brandon shouted, his voice reaching dangerous levels. We live here too. We have rights. You can't dictate every aspect of our lives because you're some paranoid old man. You have the right to find your own place if you don't like my reasonable requests. That's when Brandon snapped completely. His hand flew up and caught me across the left cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the room and sent shockwaves through my entire body. The sting was immediate and shocking. Not just the physical pain, but the complete disbelief that my own son had struck me. In 42 years, I had never laid a hand on Brandon in anger, and this was how he repaid that restraint. Melissa gasped audibly, clearly surprised by the violence. Even she hadn't expected him to cross that line. Brandon stood there, breathing hard, his hand still raised like he might hit me again, his face twisted with rage and entitlement. "Don't you ever threaten us again," he said through gritted teeth, pointing his finger at my face. "This is our home now. You'll do what we say, or you can find somewhere else to live. We're not putting up with your controlling behavior anymore." I touched my cheek, feeling the warmth and slight swelling where his palm had connected. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional impact of being assaulted by my own son for asking to breathe safely. But instead of anger or hurt, I felt something unexpected: professional clarity. For 6 months, I'd been confused about my role in this situation. Was I the homeowner or the guest? The authority figure or the burden? The victim or the problem? Brandon had just answered those questions definitively with violence. I was the victim of elder abuse, committed by family members who had forgotten that respect isn't eliminated by blood relations or advanced age. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the shock. "Good," Brandon said, lowering his hand but maintaining his aggressive posture. "Maybe now you'll mind your own business and stop trying to control our lives." "Oh, I will definitely mind my business, Brandon, starting right now." I walked calmly to my bedroom, leaving them in the living room. I could hear Melissa immediately lighting another cigarette, laughing nervously about my dramatic exit, and asking if Brandon's hand hurt. They had no idea what business I was about to mind. In my bedroom, I opened my laptop and began typing emails that would change everything forever. In my bedroom, staring at my laptop screen, I realized Brandon and Melissa had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that retirement meant irrelevance. They thought my professional knowledge died when I turned in my badge 3 years ago. They were catastrophically wrong. I opened my contact database. 30 years of carefully maintained professional relationships, built case by case, violation by violation. Health inspectors, police officers, attorneys, medical experts, city officials, court clerks. The extensive network I'd cultivated through 3 decades of successful prosecutions. My career had been built on cases exactly like my current situation. Protecting vulnerable people from health hazards created by family members who thought love excused criminal behavior. Case number 1847 from 1995. Restaurant on Pine Street allowing smoking in violation of city ordinance, specifically endangering elderly customers who frequented their senior discount lunches. I documented 14 separate violations, imposed $8,500 in fines, and forced complete ventilation system installation. Case number 2203 from 1998. The landmark bowling alley case with Dr. James Mitchell as expert witness. Management allowed smoking in designated section that contaminated the entire facility where senior leagues played 3 nights weekly. We'd presented overwhelming medical evidence of respiratory endangerment. Total fines, $12,000. License suspension, 30 days. Forced smoking cessation, permanent. Case number 2891 from 2003, apartment complex where landlord permitted smoking in violation of lease agreements, specifically affecting elderly tenants with respiratory conditions. Criminal charges filed against property management. Civil penalties, $15,000. Tenants relocated at landlord's expense. Case number 3445 from 2007. Nursing home where staff members smoked near respiratory therapy equipment, directly endangering elderly patients with compromised lung function. State investigation launched. Administrator terminated. Facility fines, $25,000. Case number 3847 from 2012. My final major case before retirement. Downtown bar owner allowing smoking in violation of city ordinance, creating hazardous conditions for elderly patrons. $12,000 in fines. Liquor license suspension. Complete smoking prohibition enforced. Every single case had involved protecting vulnerable people from secondhand smoke exposure. Every case had required identical evidence to what I was now collecting. Medical documentation, pattern of exposure, witness testimony, photographic evidence, expert medical opinions. I'd prosecuted hundreds of violations, exactly like what was happening in my own living room. Robert Martinez was first on my contact list. I'd hired him straight from Northern State University in 2003. Trained him personally on proper documentation procedures, enforcement protocols, and legal testimony techniques. He'd become Senior Health Inspector for County Region 7, overseeing the exact geographic area where my house was located. Robert, it's Walter Thompson. Mr. Thompson, how are you, sir? I was just thinking about you last week when we had that restaurant case with the illegal smoking section. Used your documentation methods exactly like you taught me. That's actually why I'm calling, Robert. I need to report health code violations. Of course, sir. What's the address and nature of the violations? I gave him my own address. There was a long pause. Sir, isn't that your residence? Yes, and that's exactly the problem. Officer Patricia Williams was next on my list. We'd worked together on dozens of elder abuse cases where family members created unsafe living conditions for elderly relatives. She specialized in financial exploitation and health endangerment cases involving vulnerable adults. Walter Thompson, please tell me this isn't a professional call. Unfortunately, it is, Patricia. I need to report elder abuse with health endangerment components. What's the situation? Intentional respiratory health endangerment of elderly victim. Repeated violations after documented medical harm. Physical assault when victim attempted to enforce basic safety measures in his own residence. Any documentation? Security camera footage of assault. Medical records showing respiratory decline. 6 months of documented exposure patterns, professional-grade evidence collection. I'll need to review everything. Can you meet tomorrow morning? Dr. James Mitchell was my third call. He'd served as expert witness in multiple cases, most notably the bowling alley victory that had established legal precedent for secondhand smoke prosecutions in our county. Walter, retirement treating you well? Actually, James, I need your medical expertise again. Health endangerment assessment for an elder abuse case. Happy to help. What's the situation? 79-year-old man, previously healthy respiratory system, developing chronic bronchitis and significant lung function decline due to forced daily exposure to secondhand cigarette smoke in his own residence. That's criminal elder abuse if it's intentional and continued after medical documentation. It's intentional, continued, and escalating. 3 phone calls, 3 immediate professional responses, 3 experts who understood that health codes exist to protect people, regardless of family relationships or emotional complications. By 9 p.m., I had official appointments scheduled. Health inspection at 10 a.m., elder abuse consultation at 11 a.m., medical evaluation for legal documentation at 2 p.m. But I wasn't finished building my case. Tomorrow morning, Brandon and Melissa would discover that retirement doesn't eliminate expertise, age doesn't reduce authority, and family relationships don't create exemptions from criminal law. They thought they'd silenced an old man. They'd actually awakened a professional prosecutor. Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be our chance for family reconciliation. I'd invited my extended family, my brother Paul and his wife Linda, my cousin Janet Miller and her husband Tom, plus their adult daughter Sarah. Brandon and Melissa had promised to be on their best behavior for company. They broke that promise before the turkey was carved. The dinner was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Thursday. By 1:30, my house smelled like a tobacco warehouse despite my opening every window to create cross-ventilation. Melissa had been chain-smoking since noon, claiming holiday stress required constant nicotine intake. When Paul and Linda arrived at 1:45, Paul immediately stopped in the doorway. Walter, what happened to your house? It reeks like a pool hall in here. Melissa smokes inside, I said simply, watching his face change. Paul looked shocked and concerned. In your house? With your respiratory problems? Linda, don't take your coat off yet. Linda was already coughing from the entrance hall exposure. Walter, how do you breathe in this environment? Before I could answer, Melissa appeared from the kitchen, cigarette in hand, addressing my family directly with casual arrogance. Walter's being overly dramatic about the smoking thing. He's perfectly fine. People used to smoke everywhere before everyone became so paranoid about every little thing. She said it with such dismissive confidence, as if my documented medical condition was a minor inconvenience she'd grown tired of accommodating. Janet and Tom arrived 10 minutes later with their daughter Sarah. Janet immediately started coughing when she walked through the front door. My God, Walter, this is worse than the casino smoking section. How do you live like this? He's adjusted, Melissa said, not bothering to extinguish her cigarette, for elderly guests with respiratory sensitivities. People survived smoking for decades before doctors started inventing health scares to make money. I watched my family's faces, registering shock and disgust. Paul looked angry on my behalf. Linda was covering her nose with a tissue and breathing through her mouth. Tom was checking his phone, probably looking for urgent business calls that might require an early departure. Sarah, who was studying nursing, looked horrified at the environmental health violation. During dinner preparation, Melissa lit up in the kitchen while Linda was helping with final food preparations. Excuse me, Linda said politely. Could you possibly smoke outside while we're handling food? Smoke contamination affects taste and food safety. It's freezing outside, Melissa replied dismissively. Besides, a little smoke never hurt anyone. You're being oversensitive. Linda looked at me with sympathy and concern. Walter, this isn't healthy for anyone, especially at your age. He's fine, Brandon interjected, walking into the kitchen. Dad likes to exaggerate health issues for attention. It's an old man thing. The dinner conversation was strained and uncomfortable. Every few minutes, someone would cough from the smoke. Paul kept glancing at me with worried expressions. Janet tried to redirect conversation to neutral topics, but the elephant in the room, or rather the cigarette smoke filling the room, dominated everything. Between the main course and dessert, Melissa committed what I knew would be the final transgression. She lit up right at the dining room table, with food still on plates, with elderly guests struggling to breathe. Melissa, Janet said gently, trying to maintain family politeness, could you possibly smoke outside? I have asthma, and the smoke is really affecting my breathing. It's 30 degrees outside, Melissa replied without any consideration. Besides, Walter doesn't mind. Do you, Walter? All eyes turned to me, my family watching to see if I'd finally stand up for myself and them. Melissa daring me to contradict her in front of everyone, testing whether I'd choose family peace over basic respect. Actually, I do mind, I said quietly but clearly. I've minded for 6 months. The smoking is making me sick, and it's making our guests uncomfortable. Brandon immediately jumped in with aggressive defensiveness. Dad, don't start with this controlling behavior again. Not in front of company. Controlling behavior? Asking for basic consideration in my own home for my health and our guests' comfort? Your home? Brandon laughed with bitter sarcasm. Dad, you can barely take care of yourself anymore. We're doing you a favor by living here and keeping you company. The room went completely silent. Paul's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Janet stared at Brandon in disbelief. Linda's face showed shock at the public disrespect. Sarah looked embarrassed to witness family abuse. A favor? Paul said carefully, his voice carrying dangerous undertones. Brandon, you're living rent-free in your father's house, and this is how you talk to him? Someone needs to supervise him, Brandon said defensively. He's 79 years old. He needs oversight and care. We're sacrificing our independence to make sure he's safe. Supervision, oversight, like I was an incompetent child who couldn't be trusted to live independently. Walter seems perfectly capable to me, Tom said diplomatically. Sharp mind, good health, managing his own affairs. Really? Melissa laughed, taking another deliberate drag. He calls every little thing a health emergency. Last week he claimed my smoking was giving him bronchitis. Completely ridiculous and attention-seeking. I do have bronchitis, I said calmly, diagnosed by Dr. Michael Patterson, caused by daily secondhand smoke exposure. I have the medical reports. Dr. Patterson's an alarmist, Brandon said dismissively. Dad shops around for medical opinions until someone tells him what he wants to hear. Classic hypochondriac behavior. Janet looked horrified at the public disrespect. Brandon, how can you talk about your father that way? He's asking for basic courtesy in his own home. Because someone needs to tell the truth, Brandon said aggressively. Dad's becoming paranoid and controlling about everything. He wants to dictate every aspect of our lives because he can't accept that he's not in charge anymore. Not in charge anymore. In front of my extended family, Brandon was publicly announcing that I'd been demoted to a secondary role in my own home. Walter, Paul said carefully but with growing anger, do you want them to move out? Before I could answer, Melissa spoke up with manipulative victim playing. Where would we go, Paul? I'm pregnant, Brandon's unemployed, and Walter needs our company. He'd be completely lost and isolated without us here to take care of him. I survived just fine for 2 years after Margaret died, I said quietly. Did you really? Brandon laughed cruelly. Dad, you were depressed, isolated, barely maintaining the house, eating frozen dinners every night. We saved you from complete loneliness and decline. He was rewriting history completely, making himself the savior, and me the helpless victim who should be grateful for the abuse I was receiving. Brandon, Janet said firmly, her voice carrying moral authority, your father is asking you not to smoke in his house. That seems completely reasonable and respectful. It's our house too now, Melissa said with entitlement. We live here. We have equal rights to be comfortable. What rights exactly? Tom asked pointedly. The right to be comfortable in our own home, Brandon said coldly. The right not to be controlled by outdated health codes from Dad's ancient career that doesn't matter anymore. Ancient career, outdated health codes, doesn't matter anymore. Paul looked at me with deep sympathy and growing anger at my treatment. Walter, you don't have to live like this. This is your house. Yes, he does have to accept it, Brandon said with finality. Because if we leave, Dad will be alone again. And at his age, with his health issues, living alone is genuinely dangerous. More dangerous than living with people who abuse and disrespect him? Janet asked pointedly. We don't abuse him, Melissa said, lighting another cigarette directly at the dinner table in front of shocked guests. We just don't enable his paranoia about every little thing. Sometimes elderly people need firm boundaries. The room filled with fresh smoke. Janet started coughing severely. Linda pushed her chair back from the table. Paul was shaking his head in disgust. Sarah looked like she was witnessing criminal behavior, which she was. This is completely unacceptable, Paul said, standing up. Walter, you shouldn't have to endure this in your own home. Paul, mind your own business, Brandon snapped aggressively. This is private family business that doesn't concern you. Elder abuse concerns everyone who witnesses it, Paul replied firmly. Elder abuse? Brandon laughed dismissively. You've been watching too much television, Paul. Dad's perfectly fine. He's just being dramatic about everything now that he's getting older. My family left within 30 minutes, cutting Thanksgiving short because they couldn't tolerate the toxic environment Brandon and Melissa had created. As they gathered their coats, Paul pulled me aside privately. Walter, what they're doing to you isn't right. This is abuse, and you don't have to tolerate it. I know, Paul. So why don't you make them leave? Because I'm handling the situation, I said quietly. How? Let me worry about that. Just trust me. Paul studied my face carefully. You have a plan, don't you? I have a very specific plan. That evening, after my family had left in disgust and Brandon and Melissa had retreated to their rooms to celebrate their victory, I sat in my smoke-filled living room and finalized my strategy. Tomorrow morning, my professional contacts would witness exactly what my family had seen today. The difference was, my contacts had the legal authority to do something permanent about it. Friday morning, November 26th, 9:45 a.m. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and watching Brandon and Melissa sleep until noon after their late-night celebration, when my phone rang with perfect timing. Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Martinez. I'm outside your residence for the health inspection we scheduled. Are you ready? I'll meet you at the front door, Robert. I walked outside to greet the man I'd hired and trained 20 years earlier. Robert was now 43, wearing the official county health inspector uniform I'd worn for 3 decades, carrying the same digital equipment and documentation tools I'd used in thousands of cases. Mr. Thompson, good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. So do I, Robert, but violations are violations, regardless of who commits them or where they occur. Absolutely, sir. That's what you taught me. Walk me through the situation. We entered my living room through the front door. The air was thick with stale tobacco smoke from the previous evening's chain smoking session. Burn marks dotted my solid oak coffee table like evidence markers. Yellow nicotine stains streaked the white walls, like disease spreading through healthy tissue. Overflowing ashtrays sat on every flat surface. Robert pulled out his official tablet and began documenting with the systematic approach I'd taught him. How long has this smoking been occurring? 6 months of daily smoking throughout the house. 2 packs per day minimum. No ventilation attempts. No containment efforts. No consideration for elderly resident with respiratory sensitivities. Any documented respiratory issues for you personally? Chronic bronchitis diagnosed by Dr. Michael Patterson. Lung function decline from 85% to 59% capacity. Blood oxygen levels dropping from 98% to 92%. All documented medically. Robert photographed everything methodically. Each burn mark with timestamp and location notes. Each stain with measurement documentation. Each health hazard with professional assessment. The same thorough approach I taught him 20 years ago. Who's specifically responsible for the smoking violations? My daughter-in-law, Melissa Thompson, age 38. My son, Brandon Thompson, age 42, enables and protects her behavior when I attempt enforcement. Any documented attempts to address this situation with them directly? Multiple requests over 6 months, escalating to verbal abuse and physical assault when I tried to enforce basic health standards this week. Robert's head snapped up from his tablet. Physical assault? Mr. Thompson, that's criminal elder abuse. Tuesday evening, I politely asked Melissa to smoke outside due to my breathing problems. Brandon slapped me and threatened me when I insisted on basic health respect in my own home. Any documentation of the assault incident? I showed him the security camera footage on my phone. Clear high-definition video of Brandon striking me across the face. Audio recording of him threatening me and declaring ownership of my home. Digital timestamp proving exactly when the crime occurred. Robert watched the entire clip twice, taking detailed notes. Mr. Thompson, this is definitely elder abuse. Criminal behavior under state and county statutes. I know. That's why Officer Patricia Williams is meeting with us at 11 a.m. for the criminal investigation. Excellent. You're handling this exactly right, sir? At that moment, we heard movement and voices upstairs. Brandon and Melissa were finally waking up after their late night. Robert, I'd like them to meet you. They need to understand that health codes are real, enforceable, and carry serious consequences. Absolutely, Mr. Thompson. Brandon appeared first, stumbling down the stairs in pajamas and slippers, looking confused and concerned about why there was a uniformed stranger in the house. Dad, who is this person? Why is someone here? Brandon, I'd like you to meet Robert Martinez, Senior Health Inspector for County Region 7. Brandon's confusion immediately shifted to panic and anger. Health inspector? Why the hell is there a health inspector in our house? Because you and Melissa have been committing serious health code violations in my home for 6 months. And Melissa appeared at that moment, cigarette already lit for her first nicotine dose of the day. When she saw Robert's official uniform and equipment, she stopped mid-puff with fear in her eyes. What's going on here? She demanded, but her voice lacked its usual confident aggression. Robert stepped forward with professional authority. Ma'am, I'm conducting an official health inspection of this residence based on reported violations of county health ordinances. Violations? Melissa laughed nervously, but the cigarette was shaking in her hand. Walter, you actually called a government inspector on your own family? I reported ongoing health code violations that are endangering my welfare and creating hazardous living conditions. Brandon was shaking his head frantically. This is completely insane, Dad. You can't have your own house inspected. That's not how this works. Actually, sir, Robert said professionally, health codes apply to all residential properties where violations endanger occupants. Family relationships don't create exemptions from health and safety regulations. He turned his tablet toward them, showing the extensive documentation he'd collected. I photographed and documented 14 separate infractions this morning. Indoor smoking in shared living spaces without adequate ventilation. Smoking in proximity to elderly resident with documented respiratory disease. Property damage from cigarette burns and smoke contamination. Creation of hazardous air quality affecting vulnerable occupant. 14 violations? Melissa's voice cracked with fear. Indoor smoking without proper ventilation systems. Smoking near elderly person with medically documented respiratory conditions. Property damage from tobacco use, including burns and stains. Contamination of shared airspace, creating health hazards. Failure to provide smoke-free environment for vulnerable resident. Should I continue with the complete list? Brandon tried to take control of the situation. Look, Inspector, this is obviously a family misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. We can work this out privately without involving government bureaucracy. Sir, health violations aren't private family matters. They're legal matters under county ordinance and state health codes. Robert turned back to me with professional respect. Mr. Thompson, as the legal homeowner and primary resident, you have absolute authority to enforce smoking restrictions on your property. These residents are violating County Health Ordinance 847.3, which specifically prohibits smoking in shared residences when it endangers other occupants, particularly elderly or medically vulnerable individuals. Ordinance 847.3. I'd helped write that specific regulation in 1994 after the bowling alley case. What does that ordinance mean exactly? Melissa asked, her cigarette now completely forgotten. Ma'am, Robert explained, continued violations will result in immediate fines of $500 per documented incident, possible criminal charges for endangering an elderly person, and potential eviction proceedings if you're residing here without lease protections. Melissa's face went completely white. Eviction? But we're family. This is our home too. Robert looked at her with the steady professionalism I'd taught him. Ma'am, whose name appears on the property deed and mortgage documents? Walter's name, but we live here too, so then Walter Thompson has complete legal authority to establish and enforce health standards for his property, regardless of family relationships. I watched Brandon's face as the reality penetrated his entitled worldview. For 6 months, he'd been telling me I wasn't in charge anymore. Now, a government official was confirming that I'd never stopped being in complete control. Dad, Brandon said desperately, you don't want to do this to family. We can work something out. We're blood relatives. Blood relatives who assault elderly family members for asking to breathe safely in their own homes. My phone rang right on schedule. Officer Patricia Williams, exactly as planned. Excuse me, I said calmly. That's the police officer I called about the elder abuse investigation. Brandon and Melissa stared at me in complete horror. Police officer? Melissa whispered. Officer Williams specializes in elder abuse cases involving family members. She'll want to review the health violations, the assault footage, and the documented pattern of intimidation and health endangerment you've established. I answered the phone professionally. Patricia? Yes, we're ready for you. The health inspector is here completing his violation documentation. The evidence is extensive and clear. When I hung up, the room was silent, except for the sound of Melissa's forgotten cigarette burning down toward the filter. Mr. Thompson, Robert said, I'll need written statements from both residents acknowledging the documented violations and agreeing to immediate cessation of all smoking inside the residence. And if they refuse to provide those statements? I asked. Then we proceed immediately with formal citations, monetary fines, and criminal referral for elder endangerment under state protective statutes. Brandon looked around the room frantically, like a trapped animal searching for escape routes. Dad, please, can't we just talk about this reasonably? Work something out as family? We've been talking for 6 months, Brandon. You responded to my reasonable requests with violence and threats. That was a mistake. I was stressed and frustrated. I'll apologize and promise it won't happen again. Your apology doesn't repair my damaged lungs or restore my destroyed property value. Melissa finally spoke, her voice small and frightened. What exactly do you want us to do? Follow the law, I said simply. Respect my health in my own home. Stop damaging my property with your addictive behavior. And if we do those things, all this legal stuff goes away? Robert answered before I could respond. Ma'am, the violations have already been officially documented. The assault has been reported to police. This is now a legal matter proceeding through official channels, not a family negotiation. At that exact moment, Officer Williams knocked firmly on the front door. That would be the police. I said with calm satisfaction. Brandon and Melissa had spent 6 months telling me I was powerless, irrelevant, and incapable of enforcing respect in my own home. In 20 minutes of professional intervention, they discovered exactly how catastrophically wrong they were. The old man they'd been abusing was about to show them what 30 years of professional expertise could accomplish when properly activated. Part 8. Payoff. Official response. $1,900 words. Officer Patricia Williams entered my living room like a seasoned investigator walking into an active crime scene, which, from a legal standpoint, was exactly what was happening. Walter, good to see you again. I wish our reunion were under better circumstances. Patricia, I appreciate you responding so quickly. Meet my son, Brandon Thompson, and his wife, Melissa Thompson, the subjects of the elder abuse report. Brandon stood up unsteadily, trying to maintain some dignity in his pajamas. Officer, this is clearly a misunderstanding, a family disagreement that got out of hand. Nothing that requires police involvement. Sir, please remain seated while I conduct my initial assessment. I'll need to speak with everyone individually. Patricia was 52, a 20-year police veteran specializing in elder abuse cases involving family members. We'd collaborated successfully on dozens of investigations where adult children or relatives exploited, threatened, or endangered elderly victims. Mr. Thompson, let's start with your formal statement. I walked her through the complete timeline with professional precision. 6 months of escalating abuse and health endangerment, medical documentation showing respiratory decline, property damage from continuous smoking, pattern of intimidation, financial exploitation, and disrespect, the Tuesday evening assault that crossed into criminal behavior. Any physical evidence of the assault incident? I showed her the security camera footage on my phone. Crystal clear, high-definition video of Brandon slapping me across the face. Perfect audio recording of him threatening me and declaring ownership of my home. Digital timestamp proving the exact time the crime occurred. Patricia watched the footage twice, taking detailed notes in her official documentation. This constitutes aggravated assault against an elderly person under State Statute 18-3-209. Automatic felony classification due to victim age and vulnerable status. Brandon went visibly pale. Felony? For one slap during a family argument? Sir, any assault against anyone over 65 carries enhanced penalties under Colorado elder protection laws. Combined with the documented pattern of health endangerment, this becomes criminal elder abuse under multiple statutes. Dr. James Mitchell arrived precisely at 2 p.m. for the comprehensive medical evaluation. I'd scheduled his assessment after Patricia confirmed that expert medical documentation would be crucial for successful prosecution. Walter, let's conduct a thorough evaluation of the respiratory damage. He performed a complete examination in my bedroom, while Brandon and Melissa waited downstairs with Robert and Patricia. Lung function testing with portable equipment. Breathing capacity measurements. Oxygen saturation monitoring. Complete respiratory assessment. Significant decline from your established baseline, Dr. Mitchell concluded professionally. Lung capacity reduced from 85% to 59% over 6 months. Blood oxygen levels dropping from 98% to 92%. Consistent with chronic secondhand smoke exposure in elderly patient. Is this level of decline legally considered criminal endangerment? Absolutely. Intentionally exposing an elderly person with compromised respiratory system to known carcinogens constitutes criminal negligence and reckless endangerment under health protection statutes. When we returned to the living room, Brandon and Melissa were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both looking terrified and isolated from each other. Patricia had been efficiently busy during the medical examination. Mr. Thompson, I've completed my initial investigation and consultation with the county attorney's office. Here's the legal situation you're dealing with. She opened her official case folder, revealing extensive documentation. Criminal charges being filed, assault on elderly person under statute 18-3209, criminal endangerment of vulnerable adult under statute 18-65103, property destruction under statute 18-4501, and financial exploitation under elder abuse provisions. Financial exploitation? Melissa asked weakly. Living rent-free while causing property damage and increasing medical costs for the victim. Under Colorado law, that constitutes exploitation of elderly persons' resources. Robert added his official findings to the legal assessment. 14 documented health code violations, total immediate fines, $7,000 under county ordinance enforcement, plus mandatory professional property remediation estimated at $8,500 for smoke damage elimination. $15,500 total? Brandon gasped. That represents just the immediate administrative costs, Patricia clarified. Criminal prosecution could result in jail sentences ranging from 6 months to 2 years, permanent criminal records affecting future employment, and additional civil liability for ongoing medical expenses. Dr. Mitchell presented his expert medical assessment. Documented lung damage consistent with criminal negligence. This injury will require ongoing medical treatment, monitoring, and potential long-term care costs. The three officials had systematically dismantled Brandon and Melissa's position from every possible angle. Health code violations with monetary penalties, criminal assault with jail time, medical endangerment with civil liability, financial exploitation with restitution requirements. What happens next in this process? Brandon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Patricia answered with professional authority. You have 2 options available: voluntary compliance with a court-supervised rehabilitation plan, or formal prosecution through criminal court with full sentencing exposure. What exactly does the rehabilitation plan involve? Immediate and permanent cessation of all smoking in the residence, payment of all fines and damages within 30 days, mandatory completion of anger management counseling and addiction treatment programs, supervised living arrangement with regular welfare checks and progress monitoring. And if we choose formal prosecution instead? Criminal trial within 60 days, possible jail sentences up to 2 years each, permanent felony records that will appear on all background checks, and civil lawsuit for damages that could exceed $50,000. Melissa started crying openly. We don't have $15,500. We don't have any significant savings. Then you should have considered financial consequences before committing crimes against an elderly family member, Robert said matter-of-factly. Brandon looked at me with desperate pleading. Dad, please, we'll do whatever you want. We'll follow any rules you set. Just please don't destroy our entire future. You destroyed your own future when you chose to abuse, threaten, and assault an elderly family member in his own home. We didn't mean for it to escalate this far. We just got frustrated and hit me for asking to breathe safely, endangered my health for 6 months, damaged my property while living rent-free, threatened me in front of my family. What would you call that behavior? Patricia pulled out pre-filled arrest warrants from her folder. I can execute these warrants immediately and take you both into custody, or you can agree to voluntary compliance with the supervised rehabilitation plan. The compliance plan, Melissa said quickly, fear overriding her usual arrogance. We both agree to full compliance. Both parties must agree verbally and in writing. Brandon hesitated for several seconds, then nodded reluctantly. Yes, we both agree to complete compliance. Patricia handed them official legal documents. 60 days to complete all requirements successfully. Any violations of the compliance terms result in immediate arrest and full prosecution. Robert provided them with health violation citations and remediation requirements. Smoking cessation must be immediate and permanent throughout the property. Next documented violation triggers automatic criminal referral. Dr. Mitchell gave them medical monitoring requirements and health impact documentation. Monthly respiratory evaluations for Mr. Thompson to assess continued improvement. Any decline in his condition triggers additional criminal charges for ongoing endangerment. The three officials gathered their materials and prepared to leave. 24 hours after Brandon had slapped me for asking to breathe safely, the legal system had responded with overwhelming professional force. Gentlemen, thank you for your thorough professionalism, I said. Walter, you handled this exactly right, Patricia replied. Elder abuse thrives in silence and isolation. You broke that silence with proper documentation and professional intervention. Mr. Thompson, Robert added, You taught me that violations are violations, regardless of personal relationships. This case proves that principle perfectly. After they left, Brandon and Melissa sat in stunned silence, staring at the pile of legal documents that would control their lives for the next 2 months. Dad, Brandon said finally, I'm genuinely sorry. I never intended for things to escalate to this level. You intended to hit me, Brandon. You intended to ignore my health concerns. You intended to take over my home without permission or respect. We were just frustrated with the situation. No, Brandon, you were entitled and abusive. There's a significant difference. Melissa was reading through the compliance requirements with growing panic. We have to pay $15,500, complete counseling programs, and submit to monitoring for everything we do? The state will be monitoring your compliance. I'm simply the victim whose rights are finally being protected by law. This is going to bankrupt us financially. Then you should have carefully considered financial consequences before committing crimes. Brandon stood up angrily, then immediately caught himself and sat back down. Any aggressive behavior would violate his compliance agreement and trigger immediate arrest. What if we can't meet all the requirements? Then you face criminal prosecution and jail time, I said simply. Your choice entirely. For 6 months, they'd repeatedly told me I was powerless, irrelevant, and unable to enforce basic respect in my own home. In one day of professional legal intervention, the system had proven them catastrophically wrong. The house was quiet for the first time since they'd moved in. Melissa had extinguished her cigarette and was genuinely afraid to light another. Brandon was reading anger management program requirements, realizing his violent temper had cost him everything. I sat in my armchair, breathing freely for the first time in months, marveling at how quickly professional expertise could neutralize amateur criminals when properly applied. They'd forgotten who they were living with and abusing. Now they would never be allowed to forget again. The next 48 hours transformed my house from a toxic environment back into a comfortable home. Melissa quit smoking immediately, not by choice or personal growth, but because lighting any cigarette would trigger immediate arrest and criminal prosecution. She spent the weekend pacing nervously through the house, chewing gum obsessively, checking smoking cessation websites, and Googling nicotine withdrawal symptoms on her phone. Brandon started frantically researching anger management counselors, bankruptcy attorneys, and payment plan options. The $15,500 total in fines and property damage represented more money than they'd ever possessed simultaneously. His credit cards were maxed out from months of unemployment. His savings account showed a balance of $347. His employment prospects were now limited due to the pending assault charge. Dad, could we possibly work out some kind of payment plan for the fines? The state and county determine payment terms, not me. I'm simply the victim in this legal process. But you could put in a positive word with the officers about our cooperation. Why would I recommend leniency? You hit me for asking to breathe safely in my own home. He had no reasonable answer to that question. Sunday morning brought additional consequences. Patricia Williams called with a legal update that changed everything permanently. Walter, we've processed all the official reports through the district attorney's office. Brandon's assault charge is proceeding to criminal court, regardless of his compliance performance. What does that mean specifically? Even if he completes every requirement perfectly, he's still facing criminal prosecution for assaulting you. The compliance agreement only determines if we add additional charges to the assault. I shared this information with Brandon immediately. His face turned gray with fear and despair. But I'm doing everything you asked. I'm following all the rules. The compliance agreement covers your future behavior, Brandon. It doesn't erase past criminal acts. Now, this is going to completely ruin my life. Your violent choices ruined your life. The legal system is simply documenting the natural consequences. Monday morning brought employment consequences. Brandon's cell phone rang at 9:15 a.m. Davidson Automotive Parts, his former employer. Dad, they terminated my employment. Why specifically? Company background check revealed the pending assault charge. Corporate policy prohibits employees with any violence on their criminal record. He'd lost his income source the same week he faced $15,500 in immediate legal obligations. The mathematics of his financial situation were becoming impossible to solve. What's your plan for handling this? I honestly don't know. Melissa's pregnant, we have no savings, no place to go, and now no income source. Perhaps you should have considered those practical factors before assaulting me. I was angry and frustrated. People make mistakes when they're emotional. No, Brandon. You made a deliberate choice to use violence. Anger was your justification, not your excuse. Tuesday brought the professional property damage assessment. A restoration company specialized in smoke damage provided detailed estimates for returning my home to pre-smoking condition. $8,500, Melissa said, reading the comprehensive estimate, just for cleaning and repairs? Tobacco smoke creates permanent chemical contamination of surfaces, fabrics, and ventilation systems. Everything requires professional remediation or complete replacement. But we don't have access to that kind of money. Then you should have considered restoration costs before smoking in my house for 6 months. Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Mitchell called with encouraging follow-up evaluation results. Walter, your lung function is already showing measurable improvement. 5 days without smoke exposure, and your respiratory system is beginning natural recovery. Will there be any permanent damage? Some lasting effects, yes, but continued significant improvement is expected if smoke exposure remains completely eliminated. I shared this positive medical news with Brandon and Melissa. Instead of relief that my health was improving, they looked frustrated and resentful. So you're going to be perfectly fine, Melissa said bitterly. This whole legal nightmare was unnecessary overreaction. The legal intervention prevented further permanent damage, and you're still responsible for the damage already caused. Thursday brought official criminal court scheduling. Brandon's assault case was formally placed on the December docket. Mandatory court appearance required. Failure to appear would result in immediate arrest warrant and additional charges. Dad, could you possibly tell the court that you forgive me? Maybe they'll consider dropping the charges. Brandon, I do forgive you personally. That's completely separate from legal accountability. But if you've forgiven me, why continue with prosecution? Because assault is a crime against society and public safety, not just against me personally. The state prosecutes crimes to protect all citizens. He couldn't understand that legal consequences existed independently from personal family forgiveness. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the assault, I received a wonderful call from my neighbor, Janet. Walter, I walked past your house today, and it smells completely normal again. Could I possibly come over for coffee like we used to? For the first time in 6 months, I could invite friends to visit, without embarrassment, health concerns, or social awkwardness. Please come over, Janet. I'd love the company. She arrived 30 minutes later, breathing freely and comfortably, in my restored smoke-free living room. This is such an incredible improvement. How did you finally get them to stop the smoking? Professional intervention and legal enforcement? Good for you, Walter. You absolutely deserve to be comfortable and healthy in your own home. I'm learning that deserving something and successfully enforcing it are completely different challenges. Saturday morning, Brandon approached me with a desperate proposal. Dad, what if we just moved out immediately, found our own apartment? Would that end all the legal proceedings? The legal obligations and criminal charges continue regardless of your residential location. But if we're no longer living here, you could ask them to drop the charges. I didn't file those charges, Brandon. The state filed them after investigating the documented evidence. But you could request that they consider dropping the charges. Why would I make that request? Because we're family members. Family members who commit crimes still face identical legal consequences as strangers. You're really going to send your own son to jail? I'm not sending you anywhere, Brandon. Your violent actions and criminal choices sent you there. The legal system is simply catching up with the consequences of your behavior. After 6 months of being told I was powerless and irrelevant in my own home, this transformative week had proven the complete opposite. Professional expertise, proper legal procedures, and documented evidence had restored my rights faster and more thoroughly than any family confrontation could have achieved. Brandon and Melissa spent the weekend desperately packing their belongings, researching cheap apartment rentals, and calculating whether they could afford both rent payments and legal obligation payments. The mathematics were impossible. They couldn't afford both. But that was their problem to solve now, not mine. 3 weeks later, my house was quiet, clean, and completely smoke-free. Brandon and Melissa had found a small two-bedroom apartment across town, funding their security deposit by maxing out credit cards and borrowing money from her parents. The court proceedings continued, regardless of their residential relocation. Brandon pled guilty to assault charges and received 6 months of supervised probation plus mandatory anger management counseling. The health violation fines were reduced to $4,000 through an extended payment plan, but the property damage restoration costs remained at full value. My lung function continued improving steadily. Dr. Mitchell projected complete recovery within 6 months, assuming no further smoke exposure occurred. Most importantly, my family relationships had been fully restored. Paul visited regularly now that the house was habitable and welcoming. Janet resumed our weekly coffee meetings that had sustained me through difficult times. Tom stopped by frequently to help with yard work and household maintenance. Walter, Paul said during one recent visit, I'm genuinely proud of how you handled that impossible situation. I simply enforced basic health standards and legal boundaries. No, you stood up for yourself professionally and personally. That required real courage and expertise. The final lesson was straightforward. Professional expertise doesn't expire with retirement. Legal authority doesn't disappear with advancing age. And family relationships don't create exceptions to basic respect, safety standards, and criminal law. Brandon calls occasionally, usually when he needs money to meet his monthly legal payment obligations. I listen politely and remind him that consequences teach lessons that warnings never could. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Sometimes the quiet, professional approach works far better than family confrontation. Sometimes you have to show people exactly who they're dealing with.